In the history of cinema, there are stars who shine, and then there are black holes. Forces of nature so dense and so powerful that they pull everything around them into their gravity. Robert De Niro is the latter. For over 5 decades, he has been the silent sentinel of the American screen. A man of 1,000 faces and 0 confessions. We know the characters: the vengeful cab driver, the broken boxer, the cold-blooded mobster. But do we know the man? Or has the man been buried so deep under layers of the method that he has ceased to exist? This is not a story of Hollywood glamour. This is a journey into the rain-slicked streets of a forgotten New York, a tale of a secret identity that nearly consumed its creator, and a forbidden love that left one of the world's greatest actors standing on the edge of a psychological abyss. Before he was an icon, he was a ghost. And before he was a legend, he was a man named Vincenzo. New York City was a rotting apple. The air was thick with the smell of garbage and exhaust, and the neon lights of 42nd Street served as a backdrop for a city losing its soul. This was the laboratory where Robert De Niro began his most dangerous experiment. To prepare for Taxi Driver, De Niro didn't just sit in a room and read lines. He went into the belly of the beast. He obtained a taxi license under the name Robert De Niro. But the man behind the wheel was someone else. He drove 12-hour shifts, picking up the junkies, the poets, and the predators of the New York night. He listened to their breathing, watched the way their eyes darted in the rearview mirror, and felt the crushing weight of their loneliness. But even this wasn't enough. De Niro felt the walls of fame closing in. People were starting to recognize the face from The Godfather Part 2. He needed a way out. He needed a mask that wouldn't slip. He needed to become a phantom. This is where the history books go silent, and the noir reality begins. To escape the suffocating gaze of the public, De Niro created Vincenzo. Using the skills of elite makeup artists he met in the theater, he crafted a look that was invisible: a subtle prosthetic scar, a slightly crooked gait, and a wardrobe of grease-stained coveralls. Vincenzo was a janitor, a dock worker, of no importance. For months, Vincenzo lived in a cold-water flat in the meatpacking district. He frequented Italian social clubs, where the real wise guys spent their afternoons playing cards. He wasn't acting, he was infiltrating. Vincenzo became a regular at a jazz club in Harlem, a man who sat in the corner, nursing a glass of cheap whiskey, watching the world with predatory stillness. But the Vincenzo experiment took a dark turn. De Niro began to lose the thread of his own life. He was answering to the name Vincenzo in his sleep. He began to associate with low-level associates of the Gambino crime family, witnessing transactions and disputes that no civilian should ever see. The scandal, whispered in the back rooms of Hollywood, was that De Niro had gone too far. He wasn't researching a role anymore, illegally carrying a concealed weapon and living in the skin of a criminal. He had successfully disappeared, but in doing so, he had invited a darkness into his heart that he couldn't easily cast out. And then there was her. While the world saw a stoic actor, the shadows saw a desperate lover. During his time as Vincenzo, De Niro began a clandestine affair that would define his emotional landscape for a decade. She was the sovereign of the silver screen, a top-tier actress whose beauty was considered the gold standard of old Hollywood. She was the woman every man wanted, and every woman wanted to be. Their love was a noir thriller in itself. They couldn't be seen in the bistros of Manhattan or the beaches of Malibu. Instead, they met in the flickering darkness of grindhouse cinemas, or in the back seats of the very taxi De Niro had once driven. She was drawn to his danger, to the raw, unpolished edge of Vincenzo. He was drawn to her light, a light that promised to lead him out of the basement of his own mind. They shared a secret language of coded messages, placed in the back pages of the Village Voice. They spent nights in a secluded cabin in the Catskills, away from the paparazzi and the prying eyes of the studios. It was a romance built on the thrill of the hunt and the fear of discovery. But in a life built on lies, even the most beautiful truth eventually shatters. The end came not with a bang, but with a crushing, silent blow. As the filming for Raging Bull approached, the Vincenzo identity began to clash with the requirements of his career. The secret queen of Hollywood gave him an ultimatum: the mask or the woman. She couldn't live in the shadows anymore. She couldn't love a man who refused to be himself. The breakup happened in a rain-drenched alleyway behind the Ed Sullivan Theater. It was a scene more dramatic than any movie. She walked away, her heels clicking against the wet pavement, leaving Robert standing there, not as a movie star, but as a broken man in a mechanic's jacket. The crisis that followed was profound. De Niro spiraled into a deep, clinical depression. He retreated to a hotel room in Paris, refusing to eat, refusing to see the sun. He had lost his anchor. The woman who knew the real Robert was gone, and the phantom of Vincenzo was all that remained. He was a man without a country, an actor without a script, a human being who had forgotten how to feel joy. This was his dark night of the soul, a period of months where the industry feared he would never work again. He was haunted by her memory, hearing her voice in every crowded room, and seeing her face in every passing car. But Robert De Niro is a survivor of the spirit. He took that heartbreak, that crushing weight of loss, and he decided to burn it. He decided that if he couldn't have her, he would give the world a performance that would act as his own funeral. He took the pain of the breakup and the remnants of the Vincenzo persona and poured them into the vessel of Jake LaMotta. The physical transformation for Raging Bull was his penance. He didn't just gain 60 pounds for the art. He gained it as a shield. He wanted to bury the handsome man she had loved under layers of flesh and fury. Every punch he took in that ring was a punch he felt he deserved. Every drop of blood on the canvas was an offering to the woman he had lost. When you watch Jake LaMotta crying in that jail cell, hitting the walls and screaming, "I'm not an animal," you aren't watching a man upset about a boxing match. You are watching Robert De Niro grieving for a love that had died in the shadows. It was a cinematic exorcism, a way to scream the pain out of his system so he could continue to live. By the time the deer hunter arrived, the fire had settled into a steady, cold glow. The character of Michael Vronsky was the ultimate reflection of De Niro's post-crisis state, a man who had seen the worst of humanity, who had lived through the Russian roulette of fame and heartbreak, and who returned home only to find that he was a stranger in his own life. The silence in that film, the way Michael watches his friends, the way he refuses to take the shot at the deer, that was the new De Niro. He had learned that the only way to survive Hollywood was to be a fortress. He closed the door on the Vincenzo years. He burned the covers and the prosthetics. He moved on, but the ghosts never truly left. He remained the lonely hunter, a man who would go on to win the world's respect while keeping his heart under lock and key. Today, Robert De Niro is seen as a titan, a pillar of the establishment. We see him at festivals. We see him in comedies. We see him as the patriarch of the film world. But if you look closely, truly closely, at the way he watches a camera, you can still see the flicker of the man who once drove a cab in the dead of night. He is a man who proved that to be truly great, you must be willing to lose yourself. He lived as Vincenzo to understand the forgotten. He loved a queen to understand the height of joy and the depth of despair. He used his own breakdown to fuel the greatest decade of acting in human history. His life is the ultimate noir. It's a story of a man who realized that the world is a stage, but the most important performances happen when the cameras are turned off. He remains the guardian of his own secrets, the architect of his own mystery. He is the man who died 1,000 deaths and lived to tell the tale through the eyes of strangers. As the sun sets over the Hudson River, casting long, dramatic shadows over the city that made him, we are left with the image of a man who defied the system. Robert De Niro didn't just play the game, he rewrote the rules. He showed us that the method isn't about pretending, it's about becoming. He became Vincenzo. He became Travis. He became Jake. And in doing so, he became us. He carried our rage, our loneliness, and our broken hearts on his shoulders. The scandal of his secret life and the tragedy of his lost love are not just footnotes. They are the foundation of his genius. So, the next time you see that famous scowl, or that sudden, brief smile on the silver screen, remember the man in the grease-stained coveralls. Remember the coded messages in the newspaper. Remember the queen who walked away in the rain. Robert De Niro is the phantom who stayed in the room, the ghost who refused to leave, and the legend who proved that the truth is always found in the shadows. He is the Midnight Alias. He is the master of the mask. And he is, and will always be, the heartbeat of the American noir. Thank you for walking through the shadows with us. If you felt the pulse of this legend, subscribe and stay tuned as we uncover the dark truths behind the icons of the silver screen. The story is never over. It's just waiting for the lights to go down.